Have you ever noticed how after a profound shift in your consciousness, the people you once loved begin to feel distant, alien, as if they're speaking a language you no longer understand? Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody talks about. Spiritual awakening doesn't just change how you see the world, it changes how you see everyone in it. And sometimes, that vision is so clear, so penetrating, that what you see makes you want to turn away. Right now, if this resonates with you, type "I see clearly now" in the comments below. Let me know you're experiencing this strange and isolating phenomenon. And if you're ready to understand why your relationships are crumbling while your consciousness is expanding, hit that like button. Because what I'm about to reveal will either liberate you or terrify you. But it will definitely transform how you navigate this new reality you've awakened into. Alan Watts, that magnificent philosopher-mystic who danced between Eastern wisdom and Western understanding, once said something that haunts those of us who've walked through the door of awakening. The price of sanity in this insane world is a certain degree of alienation. But it's more than alienation, isn't it? It's a growing sense of disconnection, sometimes even revulsion, toward people you once held dear. Your family suddenly seems trapped in a dream. Your friends appear to be sleepwalking through life, and you're standing there, awake, alone, wondering if something is wrong with you, or if something is finally right. This isn't about becoming arrogant or superior. This is about something far more mysterious and infinitely more challenging. When you shift frequencies, you literally begin operating on a different wavelength than those around you. What once felt like home now feels like a cage. What once felt like connection now feels like performance. And the question that keeps you awake at night is this: am I losing my humanity, or am I finally finding it? In this video, we're going to explore the hidden mechanics of post-awakening relationships, why your tolerance for unconsciousness has vanished, what Alan Watts understood about the loneliness of the awakened soul, and most importantly, how to navigate this new terrain without losing yourself to bitterness or isolation. Stay with me. What you're about to discover might be the most important understanding you gain this year. To understand why awakening creates this strange distance between you and others, we must first journey back through the wisdom traditions that have grappled with this phenomenon for millennia. This isn't a modern problem. This is an ancient pattern, whispered about in mystery schools, documented in sacred texts, and lived through by every mystic who dared to wake up while the world around them slept. In the caves of ancient India, the Buddha sat surrounded by seekers, and yet he spoke often of the profound loneliness that accompanies enlightenment. There's a reason he called most people the multitude, those caught in what he termed samsara, the endless cycle of unconscious repetition, desire, and suffering. When you wake from this dream, you don't just see it in yourself. You see it everywhere, in everyone. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The Buddha's own family struggled to understand him after his awakening. His father wanted a king. He got a wandering monk who spoke in paradoxes about emptiness and illusion. The gap between the awakened and the unawakened isn't just philosophical. It's experiential, visceral, and often painfully isolating. The Gnostic Christians of the early centuries understood this with crystalline clarity. They spoke of two types of humans: the pneumatics, those filled with spirit, who could perceive the divine reality beyond the material veil, and the hylix, those trapped entirely in matter, incapable of perceiving anything beyond the surface of existence. This wasn't elitism. It was observation. The Gnostics noticed that after gnosis, after direct spiritual knowledge, you simply couldn't relate to people the same way anymore. Their concerns seemed trivial. Their dramas felt manufactured. Their reality felt like a consensus hallucination you'd somehow escaped. In Plato's famous allegory of the cave, we find perhaps the most poignant description of this post-awakening alienation. The prisoner who escapes the cave, who sees the sun, and understands that the shadows on the wall are not reality, cannot simply return to his fellow prisoners and resume life as normal. When he tries to tell them about the sun, about the real world outside, they think he's gone mad. They might even want to kill him for disturbing their comfortable illusion. Plato understood something profound. Awakening doesn't just enlighten you, it exiles you. Alan Watts inherited this wisdom and translated it for the modern seeker. Drawing from Zen Buddhism, Taoism, and Vedanta, Watts recognized that Western society had created a particularly insidious form of sleep, one disguised as progress, achievement, and success. He saw that most people were living what he called the game of black and white, trapped in dualistic thinking, in roles and personas, in the desperate pursuit of a future that never arrives. And he noticed, as all awakened beings notice, that trying to explain this to someone still playing the game is like trying to describe color to someone who's never had sight. The Taoist sages spoke of the uncarved block, the natural, spontaneous state of being before society shapes you into something acceptable. After awakening, you've returned to something closer to this original nature. But everyone around you? They're still carved into elaborate sculptures of social conditioning, wearing masks they don't even know are masks, playing roles they believe are their true identity. The dissonance between your authenticity and their performance becomes unbearable. In the mystical traditions of Sufism, there's a concept called barzakh, the in-between realm, the threshold state. After awakening, you exist in a kind of barzakh between the ordinary world and the transcendent reality. You're no longer fully in the matrix, but you're also still physically present in it. This creates what the Sufis called the pain of separation. Not separation from God, but separation from those who haven't yet recognized their divine nature. You're living in two worlds simultaneously, and most people can only perceive one. What all these traditions understood is that consciousness is not democratic. It exists in layers, frequencies, and dimensions. When you shift to a higher frequency through awakening, you don't lose the ability to perceive lower frequencies. You just can't pretend they're the whole picture anymore. And the people operating on those lower frequencies? They can feel your shift, even if they can't name it. They sense that you're no longer playing by the agreed-upon rules of unconsciousness, and that makes them uncomfortable. That discomfort manifests as conflict, judgment, or slow dissolution of the relationship itself. Now let's descend into the mechanics of what's actually happening inside you and between you and others after awakening. Because this isn't just philosophy. This is the raw, lived experience of consciousness transformation. And it operates according to principles that are as precise as they are mysterious. When you awaken, the first thing that shifts is your relationship with illusion. Before awakening, you were unconsciously participating in what Alan Watts called the conspiracy, the collective agreement to pretend that the roles we play are who we actually are. Your coworker wasn't just playing the role of ambitious corporate climber. You believed that's who they truly were. Your friend wasn't just performing the drama of their relationship problems. You accepted that performance as reality. You were all actors who had forgotten you were acting, lost in a play you mistook for life itself. But awakening rips away that veil. Suddenly you see the performance. You see the masks. You watch people around you construct their identity from borrowed opinions, cultural programming, and fear-based decisions, and they don't even know they're doing it. It's like you've been given X-ray vision into the human psyche, And what you see isn't always beautiful. You see the unconscious patterns repeating themselves generation after generation. You see people running from their own emptiness by filling their lives with noise, drama, consumption, and endless distraction. And here's the part that creates the dislike. You see yourself in them. You see who you used to be, and it's uncomfortable to witness. This is crucial to understand. The dislike you feel isn't really about them. It's about the recognition of the sleeping self you've left behind. When you look at someone complaining about the same problems they complained about 5 years ago, doing nothing to change, you're watching a version of yourself you worked incredibly hard to transcend. That creates a kind of psychological allergic reaction. Your consciousness has evolved beyond certain frequencies, and prolonged exposure to those frequencies now feels toxic to your system. Think of it like this. Imagine you spent years in a dark room, and your eyes adjusted to the darkness. Then one day, someone leads you outside into brilliant sunlight. At first, it's overwhelming, even painful. But gradually, your eyes adjust. You can see colors, details, depth, and beauty you never knew existed. Now imagine someone asks you to go back into that dark room and stay there. Everything in you rebels. Your eyes have adapted to light. Darkness is no longer tolerable. That's what's happening in your relationships. You've adjusted to a new level of consciousness, and the old darkness, the unconscious conversations, the repetitive dramas, the surface-level interactions, physically repels you now. Alan Watts had a profound way of explaining this through the concept of the ego versus the self. He taught that most people are completely identified with their ego, their name, their story, their role, their problems, their ambitions. The ego is always seeking, always wanting, always afraid, always comparing. It's never satisfied because it's fundamentally based on separation and lack. Before awakening, you were identified with your ego too, so when you met other egos, there was a resonance. You were all playing the same game of seeking validation, avoiding pain, and trying to prove your worth. After awakening, you've touched something beyond ego, what Watts called the real you, or what Eastern traditions call the true self. You've experienced, even if just for moments, that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your story, not your role. You are the awareness that witnesses all of these things. You are the space in which life happens, not just the content of life. This recognition is irreversible. Once you know yourself as awareness itself, you cannot fully believe in the ego's game anymore. So what happens when you interact with people still fully identified with their ego? They're seeking your validation of their story. They want you to agree that their problems are real and important. They need you to confirm that their role, as victim, as hero, as martyr, as success, is who they actually are. And you can't do it anymore. Not authentically. You can see through it. You can see the awareness behind their ego performance, the consciousness they've forgotten, the freedom they're avoiding by clinging to their limited identity. Your refusal to validate their illusion, even if that refusal is silent and unspoken, creates tension. Here's where it gets even more complex. After awakening, you develop what might be called allergic reactions to specific frequencies of unconsciousness. Everyone has different triggers based on what they've transcended in themselves. If you've worked through victim consciousness, being around people who are deeply identified as victims becomes almost unbearable. If you've released the need for external validation, watching people desperately seek approval feels like watching someone voluntarily torture themselves. If you've seen through the illusion of material success as the source of happiness, listening to someone obsess over promotions and possessions feels like listening to someone describe their favorite dream as if it were reality. The dislike isn't personal. It's energetic. You're literally operating on a different frequency now, and dissonant frequencies create uncomfortable sensations in the nervous system. It's not that you think you're better than them. It's that your entire system has recalibrated to a higher vibration, and lower vibrations feel jarring, draining, and sometimes even painful to be around. But there's a shadow side to this awakening that Alan Watts warned about, and it's essential we illuminate it fully, because this is where many seekers stumble and fall into a trap more subtle and more dangerous than the unconsciousness they escaped. This is where spiritual awakening can curdle into spiritual arrogance, where clarity becomes contempt, and where the liberated soul becomes the imprisoned judge. Watts understood something that most spiritual teachers won't tell you. There's a phase in awakening where you become insufferable. You see through the game, yes, but you haven't yet developed compassion for those still playing it. You've gained sight, but you haven't gained wisdom. You know that others are asleep, but you haven't yet remembered that you too were asleep just moments ago in the grand timeline of consciousness. This phase, this dangerous middle ground, is where the dislike you feel toward others reveals something crucial about where you actually are in your awakening. Here's the paradox that will either free you or trap you. If you genuinely dislike people after awakening, you haven't awakened far enough. Let me explain. True awakening, the kind Buddha spoke of, the kind Watts pointed toward, doesn't create division. It reveals unity. It doesn't make you separate from humanity. It makes you realize you are humanity, experiencing itself through billions of different perspectives. When you dislike others for their unconsciousness, you're actually still operating from ego, just a spiritual ego now. Perhaps the most insidious form of all. The spiritual ego says, I see what they can't see. I understand what they can't grasp. I'm awake and they're asleep. Notice the separation in that language. Notice the subtle superiority. Notice how it still maintains the fundamental illusion of separateness that awakening is supposed to dissolve. This is what Watts called the backwards law. The moment you think you've got it, you've lost it. The moment you believe you're enlightened and others aren't, you've fallen back into the very dream you thought you'd escaped. But here's where it gets fascinating. This phase is actually necessary. It's a developmental stage in consciousness evolution. Think of it like adolescence in spiritual growth. The teenager rebels against their parents, not because the parents are fundamentally wrong, but because the teenager is establishing their own identity, their own understanding, their own authority. They need that phase of rejection to individuate. Similarly, the newly awakened soul often needs to reject the unconscious world to establish their new consciousness. They need to say no to the old patterns before they can authentically say yes to a new way of being. The Zen tradition has a teaching about this. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities are the same. The world is the same. The people are the same. What's different is the consciousness engaging with it all. In the middle stage, that dangerous adolescent phase of awakening, you can't chop wood and carry water anymore. You're too busy being amazed that it's all just chopping wood and carrying water. You're too enchanted with your new vision to actually live from it. And the people around you, going about their wood chopping and water carrying, seem hopelessly mundane because you haven't yet understood that the profound and the mundane are not separate. There's another dimension to this dislike that we must examine, the phenomenon of energy vampirism, but understood correctly. After awakening, you become acutely sensitive to energy dynamics. You can feel when someone is unconsciously trying to extract energy from you through their drama, their neediness, their victim stories, or their aggressive dominance. Before awakening, you participated in these energy exchanges without awareness. Now you see them happening in real time, and your system naturally recoils. This is legitimate. This is your newly awakened consciousness protecting itself from being pulled back into unconscious patterns. The problem arises when you label everyone still playing these energy games as bad or toxic, and create a fortress of isolation around yourself. Watts would say you've confused necessary boundaries with unnecessary walls. You've mistaken discernment for judgment. You've turned self-protection into self-imprisonment. Here's what actually happens in the nervous system during this phase. Your entire energetic configuration has shifted. Where you once derived a sense of identity and security from external validation and social belonging, you've now touched a source of identity and security that comes from within, from pure awareness itself. This is magnificent. This is liberation. But your nervous system, which spent decades wired for external connection, suddenly registers the absence of that old form of connection as danger. It experiences the gap between your new consciousness and others' old consciousness as a threat to survival. So the dislike you feel? Part of it is wisdom, your system recognizing incompatible frequencies. Part of it is growth, your consciousness establishing new boundaries. And part of it is fear, your nervous system panicking about isolation and trying to make sense of why you no longer fit in the only world you've ever known. The mature awakening understands which part is which and responds accordingly. There's also the phenomenon Watts called the trickster quality of the universe. Just when you think you've figured it all out, just when you've established your new awakened identity and your disdain for the sleeping masses, life will humble you. You'll catch yourself in a moment of total unconsciousness. You'll realize you were just as asleep in that moment as the person you judged yesterday. You'll see your own ego performing, your own patterns repeating, your own awareness flickering in and out like a candle in the wind. And this realization, this humbling, is actually the doorway to genuine compassion. The dislike transforms when you realize that consciousness is not a permanent state you've achieved, but a moment-by-moment choice you make. Some moments you're awake. Some moments you're asleep. Some moments you're wise. Some moments you're foolish. And everyone around you, they're in the same dance, the same flickering, the same forgetting and remembering. The only difference is how often you catch yourself, how quickly you return to awareness, and whether you've developed compassion for the parts of yourself and others that still stumble in the dark. Now we arrive at the most crucial part of this journey, because understanding why you've begun to dislike people after awakening means nothing if you can't navigate this new reality with grace, wisdom, and practical skill. What follows are not just techniques, but transmission points, doorways through which you can move from the painful isolation of early awakening into the compassionate engagement of mature consciousness. First, practice what I call the double vision. This is the art of seeing both the dream and the dreamer simultaneously. When you're with someone trapped in unconscious patterns, train yourself to see two things at once. Yes, see the ego performance, the repetitive drama, the unconscious behavior, but simultaneously see the pure awareness behind it, the consciousness that has temporarily forgotten itself. Imagine you're watching a magnificent actor so absorbed in their role that they've forgotten their acting. You can appreciate the performance while knowing it's not the totality of who they are. This double vision allows you to interact with people's egos without either validating the illusion or rejecting the person. You're engaging with the surface while silently acknowledging the depth. Here's how to practice this in real time. The next time someone is telling you a story that triggers your "they're so unconscious" reaction, do this. Take a subtle breath, soften your gaze slightly, and ask yourself, what is the awareness behind this person experiencing right now? Don't answer intellectually. Just hold the question and feel into it. You'll notice something shifts. The irritation diminishes. A space opens up. You're no longer caught in either their drama or your judgment of their drama. You've created what Watts called the space of non-attachment. You're present but not entangled, engaged but not identified. Second, develop what the Buddhists call idiot compassion versus wise compassion. Idiot compassion is when you pretend to resonate with someone's unconscious patterns just to keep the peace or avoid confrontation. This is what you were doing before awakening, and returning to it would be a betrayal of your growth. Wise compassion is different. It allows you to hold space for someone's process without enabling their unconsciousness. Practically, this means you can listen to someone's complaints without offering the validation they're seeking for remaining stuck. You can be present without being complicit. Try this specific technique. When someone is pulling you into an unconscious conversation pattern, respond with what I call the compassionate redirect. Instead of saying, "You always complain about this," or pretending to agree with their victim narrative, say something like, "I hear that you're really struggling with this. What do you think might help you feel differently about it?" You're not rejecting them, but you're also not feeding the pattern. You're gently inviting them toward agency and awareness without forcing anything. Most people won't take the invitation, and that's okay. You've maintained your energetic integrity while remaining kind. Third, create what I call conscious containers for your relationships. Not everyone in your life needs to understand your awakening or operate at your frequency. Accept that you'll have different types of relationships serving different purposes. Some relationships are for deep spiritual exploration. Guard these fiercely and nurture them carefully because they're rare. Some relationships are for practical collaboration. Work colleagues, service providers, acquaintances. Some relationships are karmic completions, family members, old friends, where you're learning to love without requiring understanding. Stop expecting every relationship to meet every need. The disappointment and dislike often comes from this unrealistic expectation. Here's a practical exercise. Make a list of the 10 people you interact with most regularly. Next to each name, write what type of relationship it is and what its actual purpose might be in your life right now. Then, and this is key, release each relationship from the burden of being something it's not. Your mother doesn't need to understand non-duality. Your colleague doesn't need to discuss the nature of consciousness. Your old friend doesn't need to awaken at your pace. Once you stop demanding that roses be orchids, you can appreciate the beauty of what each relationship actually offers. Fourth, practice what Watts called the wisdom of insecurity. Your dislike of others often stems from a deep insecurity, the fear that being around unconscious people will somehow pull you back into unconsciousness, that their frequency will contaminate yours, that you'll lose what you've gained. This fear is understandable, but ultimately reveals a lack of trust in your own awakening. If your consciousness is genuinely rooted, it cannot be shaken by someone else's unconsciousness. A lit candle doesn't fear the darkness. It simply illuminates it. The practice is this: intentionally spend time with people whose unconsciousness triggers you. but do it as a meditation. Go in with the explicit intention of remaining centered in your awareness while they express their unconsciousness. Don't try to change them or fix them. Just practice remaining anchored in your own presence while they storm around you. You're using the relationship as a training ground for stability of consciousness. Over time, you'll notice something remarkable. Your dislike transforms into something closer to sadness, and then the sadness transforms into something closer to love. Not personal love, but the vast, impersonal love that sees all beings as expressions of the same consciousness, temporarily lost in different dreams. Fifth, develop what I call energetic titration. You don't need to cut everyone off, but you also don't need to expose yourself to draining interactions without boundaries. Learn to titrate your exposure, measure it, regulate it, adjust it based on your capacity. Maybe you can handle 2 hours with your unconscious family member if you've just come from a week-long meditation retreat, but only 30 minutes if you're depleted. There's no shame in this. You're not rejecting people. You're honoring your energetic reality and managing your resources wisely. Finally, practice the ultimate technique Watts pointed toward: seeing your own unconsciousness moment by moment. Set an intention each morning. Today, I will catch myself in unconsciousness. Then, throughout the day, watch for moments when you're lost in thought, identified with emotion, defending your self-image, seeking validation, avoiding discomfort, or judging others. Every time you catch yourself, simply acknowledge it. There's unconsciousness happening. Don't judge it. Don't try to fix it. Just see it. This practice will transform your dislike of others because you'll realize viscerally that you're still dancing in and out of consciousness yourself. The gap between you and them will shrink, not because you've fallen back asleep, but because you've gained humility about the nature of awakening itself. So here we are, at the end of this exploration, but really at the beginning of your journey with this wisdom. We've traveled through the mystery of why awakening creates distance, through the ancient teachings that warned of this loneliness, through the mechanics of consciousness that make the old connections impossible, and finally into the practical territory of how to live with grace in this strange new world where you see too much and feel too deeply. Let me leave you with this truth that Alan Watts spent his entire life trying to convey. The dislike you feel toward people after awakening is not the end point. It's a doorway. It's an uncomfortable, necessary passage between the naive connection of unconsciousness and the mature compassion of genuine awakening. You're in the hallway right now, and hallways are never meant to be lived in. They're transitional spaces, and the discomfort you feel is the signal that you're meant to keep walking through. The people you've begun to dislike, they are you. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, but actually. The consciousness looking through your eyes and the consciousness looking through theirs is the same consciousness, playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek with itself. Some pieces of consciousness have remembered who they are. Some pieces are still lost in the game. But it's all the same consciousness, and the moment you truly see this, not intellectually but experientially, the dislike dissolves like morning fog in sunlight. What remains is something far more mysterious than either connection or disconnection. What remains is what Watts called the eternal now, the recognition that every person you meet is the universe experiencing itself, that every interaction is consciousness meeting itself in different costumes, that the whole drama of awakened versus unawakened is itself just another story the universe tells itself to make existence interesting. Your task now is not to transcend humanity, but to return to it with new eyes, not to escape relationships, but to engage with them from depth rather than surface. Not to judge those still sleeping, but to remember that you too close your eyes and dream every single night, and each morning you wake again, and the cycle continues. Awakening is not a destination where you arrive and stay forever. It's a practice, a remembering, a continual returning to what's true underneath all the stories. So go into your relationships differently now. See the divine play happening through human forms. Feel the deep sadness of temporary forgetting, but also the deep joy of inevitable remembering. Love people not because they're awake or because they meet your standards, but because they're expressions of the same mystery that you are. Consciousness exploring itself through the magnificent, messy, heartbreaking beauty of human experience. And when you catch yourself disliking someone, use it as a mirror. Ask, what have I not yet accepted in myself? What am I still afraid of losing? Where am I still attached to being the awakened one, rather than simply being? These questions will guide you deeper than any technique ever could. If this video has resonated with you, if you've felt the strange isolation of awakening and needed to know you're not alone in it, if you've discovered something here that shifts how you'll move through your relationships from this moment forward, leave a comment below sharing your experience. Tell us what you're seeing now that you couldn't see before. Tell us what challenges you're facing. This community exists as a reminder that while the awakened path can feel lonely, you are surrounded by others walking the same edge between worlds. And remember this final teaching from Alan Watts, the one that matters most. You are under no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago. Every moment is a new opportunity to see clearly, to love fully, to remember what's true. The people around you will wake up when they wake up. Your job is not to force their awakening, but to embody your own with such authenticity, such groundedness, such compassionate presence, that you become an invitation, not a judgment, not a demand, but a living reminder of what's possible when consciousness remembers itself. The game continues, the dance goes on, and you, blessed, struggling, awakening you, are exactly where you need to be, feeling exactly what you need to feel, learning exactly what this moment has come to teach. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to wake up. And thank you for caring enough about this journey to seek understanding rather than just retreating into comfortable isolation. Now go. Live this wisdom, test it against reality, and discover for yourself whether the dislike transforms into something far more profound than you ever imagined possible.